In 2008, I made my second trip to Nepal to study Thangka painting. This was my teacher, Kopens, and behind him you see the mandalas of his students. And mandalas are these circle-shaped meditative paintings that you look at by starting on the outside and moving in. So they taught me to stretch and prime canvases. This is Kopens' brother, Samin. And this is the first prototype that I built a couple months later of Nila, and you can see her mimicking the circle shape and tracing the brightest point of light in the first version of her code. And I would give her black paint at night when I left the studio, and I would come back to a black circle in the morning, and then give her white paint when I got to the studio in the morning, and she'd usually have a white circle by the end of the day. I would give her paint by hand at this point, and leave a palette of the color I wanted her using nearby that she'd hit accidentally sometimes. Here are some images from Nila's camera that show some of the artists I had around in my studio at the time who were having a big influence on my work.
Hey Nila, hey, you're in a box, 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 in a box.
This is when Jamishi about to take this portrait of me and Nila and Monocrobo. This is a time-lapse video from Nila's camera of my final MFA critique. So this is my thesis committee here. This is May 1st, 2009. This is Nila's first completed painting called Galaxy, Nila at RFS. Done over her 6 months at my studio, and these are a couple detail shots. This is the part of Nila's code that translates what she's seeing into what she's painting. It's very simple and only 81 lines long, so I'm going to use it to explain how she works. So it's written for a programming environment called Processing, and its sister environment called Arduino. And Arduino is built with this microcontroller, and this plugs into the USB of her computer and through these pins to her 2 servo motors. So you can see this on her body near her eye. So this is the part of the code written for the processing environment, and first we just import the libraries that we'll need to use, so the video and Arduino. Then we initialize the variables. So the 2 things we need to keep track of are the coordinates of the brightest point of light, x and y, and the coordinates of the last brightest point of light. Now this is a circuit diagram of the Arduino and 2 motors, and this is a line drawing of her major parts. So the next part of the code is the setup function, and this just runs once when you launch the program. So this just sets the size of the image, tells it which Arduino to look for, which video camera to look for, and sets the frame rate. So here we can see the camera, the Arduino, the motors, and these 3 photos were taken by Greg Niemeyer. This is actually his daughter and wife, and they're visiting Nila on the opening night of our graduation show. This is the draw function, and this loops infinitely. So this is the part of the code that correlates the position of the motors to the position of the brightest point of light. And we constrain it here because it's important to make sure the brush doesn't go outside the range of the canvas. So I also checked the clock here and added jitter because bright sources of light tend to stay very still, and so in order to keep the brush from drying and sticking to the canvas, I added jitter that gets progressively bigger as the day goes along. And then for 1 second out of every minute, I take a short burst of screen grabs that I stitch together into these time-lapse videos. So this is footage from Nila's perspective on the opening night of our graduation show, May 15th, 2009, at the Berkeley Art Museum. The show is called What We Can Live With. So you can see the white circle that's tracing the brightest point is staying very close to the top. And that happens naturally because bright sources of light tend to be up high, but it also happens because of something that I wrote into the code. So this is the part that changes it into black and white, and then this part puts every pixel of the image into a big array, and then it iterates through it, looks for a pixel that's at full brightness. And then when it finds the brightest, that full white pixel, it takes the Y and the X and then draws a white circle around it. So this is opposed to what you can see in the early version of the code where she's tracing a blob of light. So this is much simpler and actually doesn't change things too much, but the blob tracing is something I will go back to in future versions of the code when I bring a little bit more complexity back into it. This last part of the code is just the one that saves those images I take every minute and gives them a title of a timestamp so I can stitch them together in the right order. And this last one takes an image when the mouse is clicked, and that's 81 lines. This is footage just from a couple weeks later, still at the Berkeley Art Museum, and they had some wet paint rules, so she was only allowed to paint while I was there. And you can see here some of the marks she's making. You'll see on the final version of the painting in a moment. This is Sibylla Savage taking our installation photos, and this is the work of my classmates. This is my installation photo by Sibylla Savage. This is a detail of Nila, and you can see she's painting what looks like a panda bear face, and I was really happy about this because I love pandas, but I also had in my studio a painting by Renee Dolores, a friend and classmate, and this was normally in Nila's line of sight, so it's funny to see. This is me looking distressed right before taking Nila to a high school class when she stopped working. This is the really sweet thank you card that they sent me afterwards. I did eventually get her working, and you can see the top layer in pink was from that visit, and as was this mark on the frame. Some pencil marks from when I was trying alternative media at the museum. And this was my first experiment with color with Nila, and I was not too happy about the results or the color results that followed, so that's why I've been studying color theory since. This is just a diagram of a sidecar that I built for Nila when she was on her way to the Courtauld Institute in London. I rewrote her code to go with it, and instead of a circle, she now has an eye that's open when her brush is on the canvas and closed when she's dipping down to get paint once a minute. So this is her at the Courtauld in 2010, and then back in my parents' house in 2012.